Hi, this is Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz. I'm here with Dave Bedein, a friend from way back. Uh, I'm fascinated by Dave. He knew decades ago that UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Association or agency, um, is a horrible institution that is not humanitarian. He's been banging that bell for a long time, and I think, thank God, some people are actually starting to listen to him now. Dave is the CEO and the director of the Center for Near East Policy and Research. He's doing what I would love to do, which is keeping an eye on the news. Um, More, I would say you're more of a watchdog than a journalist, though you do, of course, put out articles. I'll put the link to his website. I highly recommend following him because, like I said, he's way ahead of the ball. He knows what's going on. One of the things that he does that people don't appreciate nearly enough is he's been translating the textbooks that the United Nations provides to the Palestinian children. And for him, it's no surprise that they came across the border trying to murder us. So, Dave, what's up with UNRWA these days? The Senate is
Well,
listening to them,
first
aren't
of all,
they?
let's get a few things
Okay.
straight in terms of how I
Okay.
operate. If it was only school books, you wouldn't have a story here. School books, you take upon a bunch of people who know Arabic, put them in a corner, and show what's happened. But I'm an active guy. When I started getting involved with UNRWA, I was a little younger then, like I was 37 then, I'm 73 now. I would go to the UNRWA camps and play ball with the kids, listen to them, and I would say, "Hey, I'm here in Dheisheh," and they said, "No, we're not from Dheisheh, we're from Yaffo." "Oh, when's the last time you were in Yaffo?" "We've never been to Yaffo." "But you're from Yaffo." "Oh." I was fascinated. Look, let's be very clear about something. I have a degree in social work. What they teach you in social work is when you meet people who say they're going to kill you, they may do so. Oh, and this is the bottom line, that understanding. I mean, after the 6 Day War, I was a little bit hopeful on this issue. I had a teacher who brought me into this when I was 17 in Philadelphia when I grew up, and he said, "Well, the refugees are going to be in our hands now. We can do something. We can get them out of the refugee camps in decent conditions." And 2.5 years later, I came to Israel for keeps, and the first thing people said to me, "Oh, they're great for cheap labor." "Oh, really? You're going to be people who have a philosophy of continuing the battle of 1948. You're going to just have them building, and that's it." And I kept hearing that the basis of the Arab army, the PLO army, was in the refugee camps. And I wasn't
Right.
surprised when I found out in 1972. I was only in Israel for 2 years, but the people who did the Munich massacre, which people may not know, that there's some PLO guys who came from the refugee camps came into the Israeli pavilion at the Olympics and murdered stars of the Olympic teams. And what was motivating them was what they called the right of return. The right of return is not just right of return, but right of return by
If
force of
I
law.
can interrupt you for one
Sure,
minute, you just touched
sure.
on a point that's so incredibly true. That we only, I mean, it was always true and it was always obvious, but now it's clear. Many of the horrible animals that came across from Gaza and murdered Jews, they worked for them. They knew them. They knew their families. They'd been scoping it out. They had maps. They had lists. It was you would think familiarity breeds some kind of connection, but in this case, familiarity just opened the door
Not
for
when
the
you're in a
horror.
state of war. When you're in a state of war and it's the focus of your life, what the PLO was able to do with cooperation from some intelligence agencies, from the Russians, from the Germans, even from the Americans, was to convince a whole generation of people that your whole purpose in life is to take back the homes you
Right,
lost in 48. And they developed
right.
this Nakba theory. Actually, they didn't develop the Nakba theory of the disaster, called the disaster from 48. They didn't even do that till 1998, right? But the idea was every child would see himself as if he went through this disaster from 48. And in the school books, we were the first ones to get the school books. That the new school books were promised after the Oslo process that they would get school books for peace. So I joined a small group of people who were monitoring that issue, and I had access to the school books, and I even had access to Arafat. And I even spoke to Arafat. I said, Mr. Arafat, when are you going to speak words of peace in Arabic? He says, oh, I do so all the time. I don't see it. I said, so he says, well, would you like to see our new school books? And I said, oh my God, that is my opportunity of a lifetime. He doesn't think that I'm really going to do it. And we did it. And we paid them to get all their school books. And in addition, we also asked permission to go into the schools and film the kids in their schools. And I hired Arab television crews that helped film it, because I had been working for years taking TV
What
crews.
year was that?
The year that we started the office in 1987. That's when we started working on this. And the issue of getting to film the schools and film the kids was 1996. I started that.
Which was after Oslo. Oslo was in 91.
That's correct. The Oslo, of course, was a promise of peace. So I decided to test them out. I mean, since I'd already, as a hands-on reporter, had been reporting in the Intifada and the murders that took place, and the fact that they were taking credit for the murders, and it was really something to see. The PLO said they were going to turn a new leaf, and one of the journalists who worked for me are Arabic fluent, and they were able to, without much trouble, find out that they never approve the Oslo Accords. That doesn't. Most people, if I say to you the Oslo Accords don't exist, they think, what mental health institution have you been in? What are you talking about? But anyway, we
if I can add one thing, the problem is that the people who hate Israel, they're trying to rewrite history, and the problem is I'm not a really old guy. I'm 62, but I moved to Israel before the Oslo Accords. And to say, oh, the Oslo Accords came to give peace, it was way more peaceful beforehand. We had coexistence. So, and in Judea and Samaria, we refer to what's happening now as the Oslo generation. These are kids who were raised on Oslo, and they're not peaceful. Oslo kind of catalyzed them to violence.
Right.
So,
But what's interesting is, if there was real media, I think I'm part of the real media, because I went to Oslo when they got to know, when Arafat and Peres and Rabin got the Nobel Peace Prize. I decided I was going to ask some good questions, and the Norwegians didn't know better but they asked me to ask questions at the Nobel ceremony. And I asked Peres and Rabin, does Arafat really deserve this? Well, we made commitments to fight Hamas and this and that. And then I stayed on, and Shabbat was coming in. It was a little difficult to hold a microphone, but I asked him without a microphone, of Arafat, are you going to crush Hamas? Because Peres and Rabin say they're going to say that you're going to crush Hamas. His answer to me in front of 250 or 300 reporters was, I don't understand the question. The Hamas are my brothers. Now, this is all part of, if you follow what's going on as opposed to following your imagination, it was all there. Everything was very clear. There was an accord that was reached between Arafat and Hamas to work together, and that was open books. And it's sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. I was involved in a dialogue group with the Pope's ambassador, who was very concerned about the school books and how their education. He said his name was Archbishop Pietro Sambi, and he said that you can't have a peace process unless you have unless you're learning peace. And I gave him the new school books, as I mentioned. I got them because I spoke nicely to Arafat, and he got back to me not only with the school books translation, but also the translation of their constitution. And it was the Pope's ambassador who told me to tell everybody that you're not getting any juridical status here. They're not giving any juridical status. But understand, people were distracted because what the PA did was to do very good business with the Jews. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, in the same way that they were building houses and a lot of it off the books and getting salaries off the books, they also brought in corporations to do business off the books and make good profits for them. Today, what is called humanitarian assistance is actually Israeli corporations selling to a captive audience who buy all their products through Israel corporations, all the food products, 400 Israeli corporations, and that's what leads people to be distracted. What I learned in social work, which is my real profession, is that if you're tempted by material goods, you may not pay attention to your principles. And or as Groucho Marx would say, I've got principles, but I've got also got other principles. So we really have a Groucho Marxist regime. You understand?
If I can interject, you're getting me riled up because people don't understand. People in America, they're not used to the United Nations or organizations like that having any impact on their lives. They usually don't even see them. Here in Israel, we see the UN all over the place. You see UN vehicles, UNRWA, all of the Palestinian schools are run by UNRWA. They play a major role in what's going on here. And most of them are Palestinians. They don't come over and bring over foreigners to work here. I guess 80% of them are
Well, here's the. Let me be exacting.
okay.
UNRWA runs 59 refugee camps that were in my book, which is called Roadblock to Peace, which you can get through Amazon very easy, or through me directly. If you write to me, I'll send you a copy of the book. We ask for $100 contribution to our agency, and the book is there. But understand something, that initially the people who were running UNRWA after the 6-Day War were people from my hometown of Philadelphia. They took people from the American Friends Service Committee, the Quakers, who did not appreciate Zionism or Israel, but they gave them the opportunity to run the refugee camps. In 1988, the workers of UNRWA became Palestinian, not only Palestinian, but people who were loyal to the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization. And that's what happened. So that whereas the Quakers didn't like Israel, they weren't committed to killing Jews, whereas the PLO were committed to killing Jews. So again, it has a direct, as you just said very well, Eliyahu, and I think this is great that you've got a new podcast here to get people. I always like the expression, let my people know. And that's what you're doing.
Right. It's really about perspective. People hear the news. Also, one more thing, I had a personal experience. One year I did Miluim, I did my IDF reserve duty at a checkpoint that was called the DCO. It was a checkpoint into Ramallah, and it was for VIPs, press, and United Nations. One half of the camp was Israeli, the other half of the camp was Palestinian. So anyone who wanted to go in to meet with Arafat would come through that checkpoint. They'd be checked out by us, and then they'd go in. They'd be checked out by the Palestinians, and then they would go in. We were not allowed to check the vehicles. So you had these United Nations, UNRWA cars and vehicles being driven by Palestinians, go through. I just have to check their ID, and their ID was a blue card that was like mimeographed. It wasn't even printed up. It was you could make it. It was my little son could draw it with a crayon, and that meant that I couldn't check them. I remember there was one car. It was a hatchback. The guy was driving it. He had a United Nations ID, and I'm looking in the back, and there was a blanket, and I could see something like tanks, like oxygen tanks or gas tanks under a blanket with electric and hoses in it. I couldn't do a thing. I called my officer over. He looked at it. He's like, first of all, he's going into Ramallah. He's not coming out. Coming out would be a different story, but you're not allowed to check him. Those were the rules.
Well, there's a great security manual called the Mad Magazine. And Mad Magazine's theory was you can't make these things up.
Right.
And that's and at the time you were here probably for the Yom Kippur War. And that summer, 73, my Hebrew was getting a little bit better. And before the war. And there was a comedy routine from a group called Gashash Achiver. And they did this routine of there was just too much miluim, too much reserve duty. And the man complains to his wife. He says, well, why don't you take Ahmed? You're in charge of organizing the neshek, the weapons at the base. Ahmed does such a good job in gardening. He'll organize the weapons for you. Everything will be fine. He'll do it in a fine way. It'll be, it'll
Right.
look nice and all that. And he'll be in charge of the Nashakia. And he brings him in for a good coffee, and they say, we now have the solution to our miluim, and the Arab is going to do it for me. And that was like a week before the Yom Kippur War. The whole point of people kidding themselves, and that's one of the first things we learn in social work about people who kid themselves and who really do not see reality because they'd rather see something else. And when I did have my one, I covered Arafat a lot. When I had my one meeting with him, I brought along with me somebody who was an international expert in body language, and he's the same guy who trained Alal with people doing security checks. Did you pack this bag yourself? Do you have any guns? And anyway, so he said, "What was your impression of Arafat?" He says to me, "If I didn't know who he was, I would say he was incapable of violence by his body language." But the previous time I had a connection personally with Arafat, with his spokesman, we did a movie about how Arafat was killing off his opposition. And so we were a little hesitant before going in to see the Arafat's police. And he said to us, this is Arafat's right-hand man, he says, "You can trust Arafat. He's only killed 12 people with his own hands. Not to worry." Oh, anyway, but let's go back to UNRWA.
Yeah, if
See,
I can, I just want to.
UNRWA set up a whole system.
If I can, I'd like to give a little bit of context for the listeners.
Sure, of course.
UNRWA is supposed to be a humanitarian organization for refugees. It was established in 1949, and it is the only refugee organization that is specific to one group of people. Okay, and it is not humanitarian, and it does not help refugees. It's the only refugee organization in the world that has not resettled a single refugee. Right. It has 7 times more refugees today than when it started. And the reason is there is, I think it's the United Nations Human Rights Commission. That's
the United Nations High Commission for Refugees.
High Commission for Refugees, right. And they're in charge of every other refugee in the world who is not Palestinian. And they take the dictionary definition of what a refugee is, which is a person who was displaced from their homeland because of violence or political unrest or for various other reasons. And according to that definition of a refugee, it's a person, an individual. It also, and not their children that are born after they become a refugee. And if they become a citizen of another country, then they lose their refugee status, and they can't just go wherever they want. It's like the first country they land in. They can't like run away from China and say, "Oh, I'd like to live in America." If they leave China, the first country they come to, that's where they're a refugee. If they leave that country, they no longer have refugee status, and certainly not second, third generation. For some reason, UNRWA defined a Palestinian refugee as a person who was forced to flee from the region we now call Israel. That includes Judea and Samaria, and all of their descendants. So we now have 7 times as many Palestinian refugees as there were in 1948, 1949, and 1967. So that means that UNRWA is enormously unsuccessful as a refugee organization. Also, as a humanitarian organization, we're seeing now that they cannot even distribute, and probably because they don't have the desire to distribute humanitarian aid.
Well, I think you're using the wrong term. There's no humanitarian aid. All the Israeli food corporations and other corporations come and sell the material to the Arabs. It's paid for by the UN. It's a perfect match.
Yeah. So tell me what's news with UNRWA. They're now being reviewed by the Congress.
Let me give you, yes, that's what I'm doing right now. I'm filed a story with the U.S. Congress, helping out the House Foreign Relations Committee. I've been in touch with them all these years, and basically there's several questions, several issues actually. Let me see how many I've got here. 14 questions. Yeah, yeah. So like, first is the issue of the school books. The school books which do not have any, who do not have any, one second, I'll get out one good school, the best school book. Hold on.
Yeah, it's they're teaching them reading, writing, and kill the Jews.
Reading, writing, and Retzach.
Reading, writing, Retzach is murder in Hebrew.
Right now, reading, writing, and Retzach, and they have songs, and all that. It's a whole culture of murder. It's not a culture of hatred, because as a psychologist, an Arab psychologist explained, we don't want to spend it. We don't want to waste time on education for hatred. We want to get right to the point of killing, and that's the difference between them and the Nazis. Okay, now look at this here. You can see it through the screen here.
Oh,
This is a woman who this book is dedicated to, right? It's a school book for fourth grade, and her name is Dalal al-Mughrabi. Now, you may not know who she is, but every Arab child knows who she is because she is a hero. She's the person who attacked an Egged bus and bus drivers on a vacation on a Shabbat, March 11th, 1978. And she wound up taking them hostage and eventually murdering 36 people, amongst them 13 children. Now, Dalal al-Mughrabi became a hero because she pulled this operation off. It was the biggest refugee attack, terrorist attack at the time, and she became a hero. And by the way, when she got off the bus, she found a American photographer taking a picture of the flowers at the beach. And her name was Gail Rubin. She was the niece of Senator Abraham Ribicoff from Connecticut. Anyway, she murdered after interrogating her. She murdered her, and then they grabbed this bus, and that was their legacy. And we know what about her story because two of the people with her and her gang eventually got out, and they're free to talk about what she was all about. So this book is dedicated to her. And it's distributed by the Palestinian Authority, but also by the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, by UNRWA. Now, you can't quite see it in the back of the book. It says it's published in 2023. It's actually from 2018. So we brought this book, amongst other things, to the head of the United Nations, Guterres, and he was shocked by it. And he told the UNRWA to get rid of it. And they did until 2 years ago. They brought it back in and put the 2023, actually a year and a half ago, January 2023, they put it on the insignia, and we went to the Palestinian Curriculum Center, and we bought 100 copies of this book so we could give to diplomats, journalists, spies, whoever wanted to take it. And so the first thing, the Lazzarini, the head of UNRWA, is being called to testify. So the first thing is going to be asked about will be about this book. Why, as a United Nations agency, does this book exist? Why is it being used? The second thing is they're using the Palestinian Authority curriculum. Now, we know about the curriculum, not from rumor, but we have the entire curriculum. We bought it. Again, Arafat said it was fine to buy it. And the curriculum is based on what? It's based on right of return by force of arms. But there's a little problem there because the United Nations dictates that they have to have a school system based on what? On the UN theme of education, which is peace begins here. How is that connected to peace? The third issue is that the school books, I don't have it in front of you, you can see on my the schools are decorated with posters and murals of martyrs, Arabs who die while they're murdering Jews. And that every child, we've made 25 movies, so you can see the children walking into schools surrounded by murals of people who murder Jews. Is that an atmosphere conducive to the United Nations idea of peace? Well, maybe not. Then number four,
I want to point out you're focusing a lot of energy on education, and a lot of people are like, education. I think maybe because the Western headspace is education is to raise your kids to have a career, a good life. That's not at all what they're educating their kids
again, I mean,
and that's why this is a 70-year conflict. Is because as long as you keep educating the kids, it just keeps coming back on itself. It's never going to go away.
And this is a new curriculum. Now, it's important to understand. All the 1,000 books that we were able to get hold of, they're all new books. And again, emphasizing right of return by force of arms. Meaning, what does that mean? It has at least 20 books of the children going back to where they came from and hearing stories about how their fathers were murdered and their mothers were raped. And that's the education. By the way, what's the connection to UNRWA? UNRWA allocates 58% of its $1.6 billion to budget to education. Now, by the way, that money comes from 67 nations, as they're listed on our site, IsraelBehindTheNews.com, and they're listed by the UN themselves. And you, as people who view this program, you can be asking, your home country, why aren't you doing something to address the issue of their education? I mean, you can't get rid of UNRWA. You cannot get rid of UNRWA. UNRWA is part of
This is what you said. I want my listeners to understand this. There are calls to disband UNRWA.
Well, they're stupid.
And you were totally inside of it. You said to me, "No, we shouldn't." And I was like, "Really?
No, I didn't say
this is a very controversial opinion,
no,
and
I didn't say you shouldn't. I said you can't
from a very knowledgeable perspective."
First, I'm sorry to talk over your voice there. It's not that you shouldn't. Of course you should, but you can't. You know, a great rabbi once said, "You can't always get what you want." We'll find out which rabbinic source that was. But of course, I'd like to be the king of Siam. I'd like to see a better world. I'd like to get, but you can't always get what you want because the UNRWA is ensconced inside the United Nations. I spoke at the UN Foreign Correspondents Association a few years ago about how important it would be to replace UNRWA with UNHCR, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees.
Oh.
Wouldn't that be nice? But you can't replace one UN agency for another with another, and this has already been put as part of the UN, and you can't move this around. What you can do is you can put criteria for them getting the money. In other words, you can't get rid of UNRWA, but you can certainly, on my website, IsraelBehindTheNews.com, I've got a program that people can read, very easy formula, which is number one, you can demand that the schools change their curriculum. Number two, you can make sure anyone who is a part of it has anything to do with terrorist organizations can be fired. Number three, you can put in criteria that if you have a connection with a terrorist organization, you can be fired. Number four, you can introduce UNHCR standards, which is not to say right of return, but right to be placed in a decent place to live. And last but not least, issues such as the maps that they give out. The maps that UNRWA give out, and it's a United Nations agency, right?
Right.
Israel doesn't exist. Well, if you're a United Nations agency, you know, you ascribe to a higher authority. So I was about to say
it's actually fairly ironic because, I mean, the UN recognized Israel in 1947, and
49.
now the UN organization, what?
49.
49. And now you have a United Nations organization that effectively erases Israel.
And that's not a coincidence, because the person who conceptualized UNRWA was a man named Count Bernadotte. He was the UN negotiator in 1948, and he was very upset with the Israel law of return. So he substituted the right of return. He wanted to bring the Arabs back here and stop this. So Bernadotte died of unnatural means, you may or may not know, on September 17th, 1948. Three members of the Stern Gang, also known as the Lehi, they administered the last rites to him by inserting 3 bullets in the back of his head. And that was a way to basically neutralize him. He was neutralized, but the UN resolution to create UNRWA was in his memory. Very important to know. So this is not just, I have a friend who does academic work on UNRWA. She says, well, initially it had good intentions. No, UNRWA never had good intentions, and that's important to understand. I mean, there's one of the studies we came out with, which is one of the things that Lazzarini has to answer for Congress. We put out an investigative study to show that the workers' union and the teachers' union are dominated by Hamas. Now, let's repeat that. We put out a report for the European Parliament, which proved, and by the way, every 3 years since then, every time they have an election, the Hamas win the election. Now, is it appropriate for teachers and workers at UNRWA to be part of Hamas? Now, of course not. But on the other hand, people don't know that. This is something that the UN, the head of the UN, the UNRWA can handle. Now they also have a singer named Muhammad Asaf, who was the UNRWA, ambassador of goodwill, except for all his songs are songs about killing Jews. Oh, I mean this is they can make it forbidden for him to.
And
For him
they're not
to,
even, and I've read some the lyrics of some of these songs translated. They're not even hinting. They're not like hinting, oh, we have to kill the enemy. They're saying we want to kill all the Jews.
Not only that, but in this one of the school books we discovered, which we translated and it's on our site, there's actually a story about our ambition is to engage in total murder and of the Jews. Now that was taken out of that school book. Well, what they did was put out 44 YouTube songs for the children to sing about murdering Jews. We have that on our site. It's very important. Again, now they don't hide anything. By the way, I resent the fact that I'm going to be critical of some of my colleagues who call UNRWA a Nazi entity. No, the Nazis tried to cover everything up. They don't try to cover anything. If I was a Nazi, I would sue the people who are calling UNRWA Nazis. It's much worse. They do not fear for retribution for what might happen later.
They were Nazi allies.
No, that was the Hajime al-Husseini, yes, absolutely. But as a matter of fact, when I go into the PLO has a information center here in Jerusalem, and I was at the office of the director the other day to get more material. And I have to be a grandfather. He's a grandfather, and I'm seeing he's looking at it from the back of a picture on his desk. So I walk around and see what it is. It's a picture of the Hajime al-Husseini, the Mufti. I mean, these guys, they don't kid around. Everything is there. Everything is up front. And amazingly,
that's the disturbing part. I mean, UNRWA might be a tiny bit deceptive. They're not saying we're out here to kill Jews, but this whole multi-generation thing. But what really disturbs me is when it comes to Hamas and even the Palestinian Authority, they're not holding back. They're not hiding anything. They're not prettying up their speech. It's all out on the table. And it's
what distracts people is business.
Yeah.
When you have good income, you don't pay attention to it. And that's one of the hardest things I learned during my social work studies. There was a whole story, the many stories, what happens when you're dealing with people from the mafia who are running school systems or whatever, or let's say you're working for a municipality, everyone in the municipality is corrupt. And here it's not only corrupt, it's people who advocate murder.
Yeah, and it's kind of insulting not to, they'll say we want to murder the Jews, and then you have like the Western diplomats are like, no, it's not really what they mean.
Well, that's
exactly what they mean.
Well, again, I spoke to someone at the Knesset today because I'm trying to get the Knesset to run my movies. And the movies of what we show, I made 25 movies. I didn't know I was a movie director, but I am. And I'm a damn good one because I take the children are very happy to do their lessons on killing Jews and do it in front of the cameras. And we made 25 movies. And basically, that's how you see all the preparations for what happened on Simchat Torah, October 7th. You see the children practicing hijacking cars, killing soldiers, and they in their summer camps they always have one of the best things in summer camps are plays that you do for the kids. So the plays they have are always finished with them murdering Jews. Now again, this is not something that's been seen by the Israeli public or by anyone in the last 4 months because they're trying to say, oh, it only happened on October 7th. Well, it's only then. No. But now when you see when one of the reasons why people are afraid to talk to me sometimes, and my rabbi says, don't be careful, don't ask David Bedein what's new. He may tell you.
Right.
And
so that's what but from what I understand, people are not, I mean, at least on some level, people are now starting to listen and they're questioning UNRWA.
Well, again, the people are questioning, but that's the problem when you go to the people as opposed to members of parliament. The members of parliaments, U.S. Congress, the Knesset, they're not asking enough. And it has not yet motivated any country to cut off the money from UNRWA. They did a 2-day pause. That was it, just a 2-day pause.
And even America, I found out they said, oh, we put a pause on it. But meanwhile, they already gave them 90% of their money for
That's
the
right.
year.
They put a pause on, and what was good about the US for a little while was they held back money to UNRWA for 2 years until they would change their curriculum. Well, they didn't change their curriculum, and they because they wanted to find a way to get what is called humanitarian support, and they were using UNRWA, but they don't need to do that because basically, I mean, humanitarian support means you give them some milk and flour, that type of thing. But where has all the flour gone? And this is the story. And one of the first investigative study my agency ever put out about UNRWA was how medical equipment was being sold on the open market, and so was medical.
Mm.
We're
And I have literally seen with my own eyes UNRWA ambulances being used to move fighters around during combat. I have literally seen it with my own eyes. I was stunned, and because I was a medic in the army, so I had a soft spot in my heart for the medics. And then I was trying to be nice to them, and then I was seeing, like in the middle of a firefight, these ambulances are, you don't want to shoot in an ambulance. And then they stop, and you see armed guys jump out of the ambulance. You're like, oh my gosh, what did I do? They have no limits, no shame.
One of the things that is it's a part of our education is education for peace and reconciliation. Certainly is my education. But what's not emphasized is that the theme of Amalek, people who are really out there to kill you, is
Yeah.
not something that is part of the Western education. I had good friends in Kibbutz Be'eri, the first kibbutz that was attacked, and again, I show in our movies we show models of how they did infiltration. And I had a friend there named Vivian who was organizing social work for the Arabs in Gaza to help them get medical treatment. And not that they needed additional, because there was plenty in Gaza which wasn't being used, medical treatment which wasn't medical centers. Okay, we had a disagreement because I put in my energy to see what they were learning in their schools. Well, she listened, and it was basically what the Arabs did was to attack the bastion, the mother church of the Israel peace movement, of which for full disclosure, I was once part of that. And I didn't one morning have an epiphany. I saw the reality. And the reality is that the PLO took over, the Palestine Liberation Organization took over, and they brought into their schools this whole issue of educating for killing Jews. Now, one of the things our agency did, which has been incorporated by UNRWA, is the issue of laws that were passed, unprecedented laws that if you murder a Jew, you get a salary for life. What I keep on my desk
Right.
is a picture of my daughter's best friend, Dahlia. I'm going to show you this is Dahlia. You can see it there.
Oh, I remember she was murdered right in front of a lunch food.
That's right, on a bus stop, and then this is the guy who murdered her, right?
And a good friend of mine from Bedein was also stabbed at that scene. He was there, and he had a pistol, he had a handgun, and his handgun jammed. So he was very seriously wounded.
Well, I did not know that, but anyway, here's the story.
Yeah, Shia.
Hear the news
Great
about
guy.
freeing prisoners. This guy may be freed. The guy who murdered this girl, my
Yeah.
daughter's best friend, and her name is Dahlia Lemkes.
I remember
And
that.
you
Oh
understand,
my
it's
gosh.
it's a story here in Israel which doesn't stop. And this is the fact that people may become heroes who have been convicted murderers. But the Israel spectrum has changed a lot. I just mentioned Kibbutz Be'eri. Kibbutz Be'eri, the mother church or the bastion of the peace movement. There's now a banner overlooking Be'eri, says in Hebrew is Zachoret Asher Asalacha Amalek. Remember what Amalek did to
Whoa.
you.
Remember what Amalek did to you. And these are people who were strong in the peace movement, left wing as you could get, and now they're wow.
When reality,
Wow.
this is my social work training. When reality hits you, you become a different person. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, I want to be. Let me tell you an interesting story. I mentioned getting the school books, and I was the first one in the country to get them. And it was very shocking to walk in. My kids were little then. Oh, what are you bringing home today, Abba? You bring home falafel for us. Now bring home school books where they're teaching it how to kill Jews. Oh, I walk into shul the next morning. There was a man named Rabbi Twersky, Abraham Twersky, who was living in a frat where we lived for a few years.
A very holy man.
A wonderful person. And I was very upset because no one really cared about the fact that I'm carrying around school books in them, which are new school books, which are supposed to be for peace, instead of they're advocating murder of Jews. And I said, what do I do? He looked at me and says, look, his field is substance abuse. And he was substance abuse in the Orthodox world. He says, until the son of a Rosh Yeshiva, head of a learning academy, died of an OD, no one would talk to him, no one would help him with the funds. And he says, you have to wait for the crisis to hit. Well, 6 weeks later, the second intifada broke out, and the kids were basically acting out the manuals of what they're doing. And now it's happening again. And I understand, even where I live in Gush Etzion in Judea, Samaria, lots and lots of people are invested in businesses in the Palestinian Authority, not seeing anything problem. The money has no smell, but it does have a smell. And that's what we have to deal with. It's very difficult to understand, to deal with people who have.
So what's your plan? What's your plan to solve this? We're stuck here with 30 years of education, educating Palestinians who've been raised in a culture of murder Jews.
Right. Well, I thought you never asked me that, Adam, because you see, I have come up with something called the UNRWA Peace Initiative. Okay. And I want more people to be involved with it. It's on my site, israelbehindthenews.com. And if you're in touch with people who are in the U.S. Congress or in any of the people in any of the parliaments, the first is to cancel their curriculum, to take the guns out of UNRWA, which is based, and the curriculum is based on jihad, martyrdom, and right of return by force of arms. The second thing is to disarm the schools, and stop the military training they have in the schools. Third thing is to insist that UNRWA dismiss employees who are affiliated with terror groups. The fourth thing is to help people get out of the camps, live in places that are not in the refugee camps. In other words, give them instead of asking the UN to put in the UNHCR, which the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, which works on resettlement, do the resettlement, helping people get to other places. And I learned from a guy named Mordechai Ben Porat, who died 2 years ago at the age of 98. He went to all the refugee camps with the idea of helping them relocate to better pay, and no one objected. And the final thing is auditing all the money coming through. It's $1.6 billion coming through and it's being wasted. There's no real transparency, and this has to be addressed.
That's also the crazy part, that when it comes to UNRWA, there's like all of a sudden no accounting, no reports, no, gee, what did you spend the money on? They just get the checks, and the checks evaporate, and that's what we're left with.
And nobody dies. If one of my good friends, he's still alive, he's close to 100 years old, Eliezer Wortman, was one of the first journalists to go into Gaza refugee camps after the 6-day war. He discovered they had a big problem on their books because nobody dies. There's no records of anyone dying. So
I saw an interview, what was his name? One of the higher ups in the PA, and they're not used to being asked questions, which makes them really stupid because they're never challenged. And the guy asked him, he's like, so you spend this amount of money every year on the Gaza airport? And he said, yes. And he said, but there is no Gaza airport. They started to build it, and then they started using it for bad things, and Israel bombed it. But they still have salaries, a lot of salaries for the Gaza airport. And he said, well, you have to pay the people. And he's like, for what? They don't,
That's the whole point. And the fact that they see, one of the things we can help the Arabs do is to consumer rights protection. In other words, they should be demonstrating against the fact that, and then look at the government of Qatar. Incidentally, Israel's not at war with Hamas. Israel's at war with Qatar. Qatar is an Arab country that finances Hamas. Now, people swallow this, and we just how stupid many of our fellow countrymen are, that as if we're at war with Hamas. We're not at war, we're with Qatar. And we have to have a citizens rebellion. Qatar also finances, for the people who happen to be women amongst I'm descended from a long line of women, I must tell you, it's full disclosure. and people who are upset with prostitution, well, Qatar is also financing prostitution. Well, they had the World Cup this year. Well, they flew over 100 girls from Gaza to participate and to entertain the boys. Get it?
Oh my gosh.
Understand what's going on?
Yeah.
In other words, Qatar is the ultimate of corruption, and this is what has to be people stand up for. Now, all this would have their attitude to women would have been theoretical had they not violated the women in the Jewish women in captivity over the last few months, and all this and my work over the years to prove that Hamas was taking over UNRWA education facilities. So people would look at it like, oh, UNRWA took over education facilities, big deal. The American League went to the National League. So what? But now we're seeing what these people are all about.
Mm.
And again, it takes when the crisis hits, as Rabbi Twersky said to me at that time, that's when people wake up, and people waking up now. And the war that began on October 7 will last for many, many years. And they think they have, and they do have. I have the Palestinian records here, their PR book. They get 100. Here it is, 135. Something called PASIA, right? And PASIA, which is the Palestine Academic Center for International Affairs, where they actually show how 135 nations give money to the Palestinian Authority without any questions, and goes into people's pockets. And that's
no accounting, no
and
reports at the end of the year.
Organized crime, everything from prostitution to narcotics to guns, you name it. And that's what we're dealing with. But on the other hand, it's glorified because peace sells. The two things that sell in terms of fundraising for Israel: peace and war. And the peace sold. And that I've seen such liars sometimes amongst our fellow countrymen. There was a man who I know personally named Shimon Peres,
Oh
who
my
was
gosh.
the foreign minister.
That's exactly what I was thinking about. He had his peace center that was getting hundreds of millions of dollars.
The Paris Peace Center were forced to close their door for 2 years thanks to our investigations showing just how much money was sold.
Good on you. I mean, they were making a big deal about arranging soccer games between Palestinian boys and Israeli boys. That's what they did, and they were getting hundreds of millions of dollars.
Was to organize funds for Peres to pay Terry Larson, who was on the Nobel Peace Prize committee, to make sure that he would get the Peace Prize in addition to Rabin. He got that's it. No, hold on 1 second. I have to get rid of this call. Stop the recording.
So I'm wondering what's new. Did UNRWA is the US Congress looking into UNRWA?
We're not sure what the Congress is doing. There is a call for an investigation, and the Qatar's people are trying to stop it. There is UNRWA is the Congress has subpoenaed the head of UNRWA to come, but the most important thing is for everyone to take action. Wherever you see committees forming for UNRWA, prosecute them. Go to the police against them. Their connection to terrorism is very clear. You can press charges. One of the things we're doing is we're creating a fund to press charges against Philip Lazzarini, the head of UNRWA. UNRWA can't be sued, but he can be sued. Because look what he's
Lazzarini, for people who don't know, he runs UNRWA. They found a Hamas computer headquarters mainframe directly underneath and UNRWA, was it an UNRWA
headquarters. UNRWA headquarters.
Right. And they were taking their electricity from them. You could see the electric cables going, and he said, "We had no idea." And I'm like, dude, you were paying the electric bill, weren't you?
Anyway, so we've come to a point of understanding that this is not an intellectual exercise. I'm asking people who watch this show to please get active and write to members of again not only Congress but every parliament in the world. Everyone should, even if they like the Arab cause and don't like Israel so much. This is a humanitarian issue which has been exploited. There's no reason for these people to stay in the refugee camps.
I remember when I was a kid, we used to collect. We used to go around on Halloween with the UNICEF boxes, collecting money for UNICEF. So you get this feeling that like the United Nations, oh, it's humanitarian. It's not, and it's not humanitarian. The people who suffer the most are the Palestinian, but the poor Palestinian people. And it's dirty, and it promotes war. It promotes death. These are evil people.
Well, and again, the system is evil, and we have to overcome that system. And it's part of the law. It's basically we're continuing. This is my last sentence. We're continuing to fight the war of 1948, and it's not over yet. And we don't know when it's going to be over. But my encouragement to people is to get active, learn about their education, and I'd like to use the expression "let my people know."
Yeah, let my people know. We got to just educate.
Anyway, you can look for all my details, including how you can donate to what
I'm going to put the links on the video.
Please. And also there's a donation link there.
Educate yourselves, because you are being lied to in ways that don't even make sense. That it's not logical. UNRWA, it's not humanitarian. It's not for refugees. It's just all it is. You know, who was it? There was one politician. She said it's not that UNRWA is embedded within or connected to Hamas. UNRWA is Hamas.
That's right. One of our movies called UNRWA Goes to War, we have show the PLO flag, and the peace system, the peace symbol of the UN being enmeshed with the UNRWA slogan. But thank you very much for having me on your program.
Thank you.
And let's keep working together.
Absolutely, David, and keep up the amazing work. I don't know how you do it year after year. You're screaming, and thank God, I think people are finally listening. People are
listening to an extent, but I have full disclosure. I've got 12 grandchildren, and I want them to live in a world of peace, not a world of war.
Amen.
Thank you.
Amen. Thank you so much, David. Be blessed.